Appreciate the fact you're here. Thank you very much. I'm Tim Andersen, the Appraiser's Advocate, and we're going to talk today about an emergent situation that we all need to know about, as well as we all need to, frankly, do something about. Now, you may have recently gotten a letter from Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac or any of the other GSEs. Sometimes we call them love notes, sometimes they're called tips. And one of the, let's call it notes, that the GSEs are making is that the appraiser isn't very good at choosing comparable sales. Now, we're going to get into this. Part of the problem is that there isn't a formal definition of a comparable sale. In fact, if you go to USPAP and you look up comparable sale, you're going to have a devil of a time because there isn't a definition of a comparable sale. If you go to the GSE's websites and you look for the definition of a comparable sale, again, you're going to have a hard time because there isn't such a definition. If you go to the 6th edition of the Dictionary of Real Estate Appraisal, there is a definition of comparable, but not comparable sales. Let me read it. It says, a shortened term for similar property sales, rentals, or operating expenses used for comparison and evaluation process. In best usage, the thing being compared should be specified. In other words, comparable sale, comparable rental, comparable property, comparable expenses, etc. So the definition, again, this is from the 6th edition of the Dictionary of Real Estate Appraisal, is nothing more specific than that. It doesn't really give us a model of what it is we're supposed to look at when we are concluding which sales are comparable to the subject and which sales are not comparable to the subject. So let's see if we can find such a model. And indeed, there is such a model. And that's where we're going. Now, again, let me make clear. This is not a definition. There is not a formal definition of a comparable sale. There has been in the past, but let's just say political forces made it difficult to continue with that definition. So we're going to look at a model, an example of a description of a comparable sale so that we can come to understand what it is that constitutes a comparable sale, even though there is not a definition for a comparable sale. Now, I'm going to start out by reading from USPAP. This is specifically the comment to Standards Rule 1-3B. Again, let me quote it. An appraiser must analyze the relevant legal, physical, and economic economic factors to the extent necessary, unquote. Now, I've edited that a little bit for purposes of fitting it into this format. But the point is, we're looking at 3 criteria: physical, legal, and economic characteristics. Now, remember, this does not say the physical, legal, and economic characteristics of the subject. It just says the physical, legal, and economic characteristics. Therefore, of what? Well, obviously, all we have are the physical, legal, and economic characteristics of the subject and the physical, legal, and economic characteristics of the sales that we may choose as comps. So this is giving us an idea of where this model is going. Obviously, we're going to be comparing the subject's physical, legal, and economic characteristics with the physical, legal, and economic characteristics of the comparable sales. So let's break that down even further. We're looking for a comparison of the physical, legal, and economic characteristics of the subject and the comps, or the comps and the subject, however you want to relate that, that's perfectly fine. Now, the physical characteristics are what we typically think of. Okay, the physical characteristics are location, the site size, the site orientation. What does it look at? Does it look at the house across the street? Does it look at the mountains, the ocean, the whatever? We're talking the quality of construction, too. We're talking the property's age and condition. And remember, we're talking both about chronological age and effective age, which is a function not only of its chronological age, but its condition, and effective age is a function, to a great extent, of market demand. For example, you can build a brand new, expensive 5-bedroom, 1-bath house, and there isn't going to be much of a demand for it. In fact, the demand may be for nothing more than the land underneath it. Therefore, a 5-bedroom, 1-bath house, brand new, expensive, is going to have a very advanced effective age, because typically the market is going to go after the land because it doesn't want the house. Nobody wants a 5-bedroom, 1-bath house. So that's how effective age, chronological age, condition, market forces, etc., all combine to indicate a property's effective age. Now, legal characteristics include, but are not necessarily limited to, the quality of the estate. Now, typically, we deal with the fee simple. Occasionally the lease fee, really occasionally the leasehold, but typically the lease fee. Okay, so that's what we're looking at there. Is the property leased or not? Is the property rented or not? Let's face it, if you've got a home and some family has leased it for 5 years, then it has a value in the fee simple, and then there's the present value of the discounted cash flow. So the two values are probably going to be different. So therefore, we have to take into account both when we're looking at the legal characteristics of the subject. Are there any deed restrictions? Now, those will be listed in the deed, or they'll be referenced in the deed, say, to condominium documents. Now, I live in a neighborhood that does not allow commercial vehicles to park overnight. In other words, if you're a contractor and you've got your name on the side of your truck, you can't park here overnight. Now, you don't have your name on the side of the truck. Park here all you want to. But that is a deed restriction. Okay, other legal characteristics are going to include contracts for sale and purchase, contracts for deed, options, or fractional interests, which may mean a condo, or it may be there are a whole bunch of owners. So we've gone through physical characteristics. We've gone through legal characteristics. Let's look at economic characteristics. Now, again, that's going to be, is it leased or not? Obviously, a property that's leased generates income. Now, does it generate income at a market rate or at a non-market rate? And that could either be above market or below market. We've got to take that into account. For how long? If it's for the next 6 months, it probably doesn't make any difference. If it's for the next 10 years, yes, it makes a difference. So from an economic standpoint, we're looking at current interest rates. Now, I'm recording this at the beginning of March of 2025. So right now, interest rates are 6.75%-ish. In the last year, they've been as high as 7% and as low as about 6%. So that kind of tells us where interest rates have been, and they suggest where interest rates are going to be. We don't know, obviously, but we can assume 6.75%, 7%. All right. Now, we've already talked about whether we're dealing with the lease fee estate, the fee simple estate, the leasehold estate, etc. Are there any restrictions on leasing? For example, in condos, it's not uncommon for the rules to say, well, yeah, you can lease no more than 30 days a year. Okay, well, that's fine. But then that means that's not really an income-producing property, because there is a restriction on the amount of income that can be generated. Therefore, it would be kind of silly to appraise that property as if it were an income-producing property, because it isn't. Something that is extremely important right now in economic characteristics is, what are insurance costs? I think everybody realizes that insurance has gone up just ridiculously. And in some states, such as California, after all those fires, insurance companies are pulling out because the state legislature has said, hey, we really don't care that you get a proper return on your investment. We're not going to let you raise your rates. Well, in that case, the insurance company has two choices: lose money or leave. And chances are they're going to leave. So we have to look at insurance costs. If you can't get insurance, you're not going to get a mortgage, because the lender, the mortgagee, is not going to accept that property, is not going to accept that risk without the promise of replacement in case of a catastrophic loss. So that is an important economic characteristic we have to take into account. And then we have to look at the supply and demand dynamic. Now, right now in Southern California, after the fires, folks are tearing everything down, tearing the improvements out, getting down to the dirt, and just selling the lot, because that's where the value is. People aren't selling burned out houses. They're not selling partially destroyed houses. They clean that off and they're selling the lot. So the demand is for the land underneath that building. The demand is to be in Malibu. Now, given the mudslides and the fires, I don't necessarily know why somebody would want to be there, but clearly I'm not moving to Malibu, whereas a whole lot of people want to. Yeah, okay, that's a market force. There's a demand for property there, despite the risks of living there, which everybody already knows. But we have to be aware of it too. So we've got physical characteristics, we've got legal characteristics, we've got economic characteristics, all of which we need to understand in order to choose a comparable sale. We have to have in the work file as well all of the stuff that went behind those characteristics. So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, if the property has most of the same physical characteristics as the subject, most of the same legal characteristics, most of the same economic characteristics, it's probably a comparable sale. And we have to have that list of probablys in the work file. We have to have those filters in the work file. So if somebody says, well, you used 1, 2, 3, 4 Elm Street as a comp and not 5, 6, 7, 8 Oak Street, why? So you can turn to your file and say, well, here, I looked up 5, 6, 7, 8 Oak Street, and it was a gift from a parent to a child. Therefore, it did not sell on an arm's length basis. Therefore, it's not a comparable sale, and I didn't use it. Even if the child paid full price, you still have that question. Was it really arm's length? By definition, was it really arm's length? And chances are you can't answer that. So we have to have all that stuff in the work file. Now, we've decided we've got 6 houses, okay? They've got essentially the same physical, legal, and economic characteristics as the subject. Now, why is it that these are important? Now, this is the whole purpose of this broadcast. This is why we're getting into this, okay? A property is not a comparable sale to the subject, whatever the subject be, unless and until it has the same highest and best use as the subject. If it doesn't, it's not a comp. It's that simple. Okay? Now, somebody's going to say, well, I live in a rural area and there aren't a lot of comps. Okay, there may not be. And as a result, instead of having a lot of similarities between the physical, legal, and economic characteristics, there may be fewer similarities and characteristics. Okay, that's perfectly fine. But the issue is we appraisers tend to ignore that. We don't explain it to our clients, and therefore our clients don't understand why we chose 1, 2, 3, 4 Elm Street rather than 5, 6, 7, 8 Oak Street as a comp. So we have to explain the whole process. We started with this many, we went through these filters, and we ended up with this many. That's all got to be in the work file. So the key to a comparable sale is it must have the same highest and best use as the subject. Therefore, we first have to figure out the highest and best use of the subject. Once we have the highest and best use of the subject figured out, the rest of it's a piece of cake. Now, you say, wait a minute, I got a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,500 square foot house in a neighborhood full of 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,200 to 1,800 square foot houses. How hard can the highest and best use be? Let me let you in on a secret. It's not. Okay, the highest and best use is what's there, right? The highest and best use, as if it were vacant, would be build another similar house. That's not hard. The issue comes, however, when we have places like California, like Minneapolis, like I think parts of Texas, where the state or the county or the city has come in and said, okay, that started out when the place was platted 75 years ago as single-family homes. But now, in order to try to bring real estate prices down, which, by the way, this will not do, but in order to try to bring real estate prices down, now instead of just building 1 unit on that site, if it were vacant, you could build 2 units or 3 or more, or you could build a house in an ADU or any number of things, and we'll waive the parking requirements. That's when things get difficult, because the comparable sale of that vacant lot across the street, unless it's going to be developed with one house, which quite frankly the new zoning may not permit, isn't the same as the subject, which has one house, and therefore there's a different highest and best use. So most of the time, yeah, you're in a residential neighborhood, cookie cutter houses, they've been there for 50 years. Yeah, highest and best use is not that terribly difficult. But what comes in, the issue is that of change. Okay, what happens when the zoning changes? What happens when market tastes change? What happens when everybody comes in and says, well, that's a lovely house. It was built in 1947, and it was fine at the time for a GI returning from the Second World War, but that's not what I want. I'm going to buy 3 of those lots, tear all the houses down, and build a much bigger, more ornate house. Okay, assuming you got the money, that's perfectly fine. But the point is, the appraiser, we have to take that into account in coming up with site value, in determining the effective age of the improvements, determining if there's any functional obsolescence, determining if there is any external obsolescence. That's our job. Therefore, we have to know, we must know, there's no question, what the subject's highest and best use is as if vacant and as improved before we can choose comparable sales, because the comparable sales must have the same highest and best use as the subject. And even though there is no definition of a comparable sale, that's probably as close as we're going to get. A comparable sale is one that has the same highest and best use as the subject. I appreciate you listening. Thank you very much. I'm Tim Andersen, the Appraiser's Advocate. If you need to get in touch with me, please do. My email is on the screen. It's tim@theappraisersadvocate.com. I look forward to working with you. I'll be happy to consult with you. Just get a hold of my website. When the Calendly button comes up, make an appointment with me. There's a retainer involved, and we'll sit down and work out your issues. Again, thank you for being here. Listen to lots of these podcasts, not only mine, but other folks as well, because you get a lot of great information from them. So again, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.